Thank you, everybody, for joining this conversation today. I'm Shantha Reddy Alonso. I'm the Executive Director of the America the Beautiful for All Coalition, and I am zooming in from the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people in College Park, Maryland. The America the Beautiful for All Coalition, if you don't know us yet, we are the broadest and most representative U.S. coalition working to save nature in a way that upholds environmental justice and defends public health. And since our founding in 2022, our coalition's co-founders and leaders have worked to create an America the Beautiful, not just for some, but truly for all. That means organizing a more equitable conservation movement that truly learns from and centers frontline leaders. It means sharing resources and power to make our movement less siloed and more nimble, more connected and responsive. Our coalition has work groups focused on ocean, freshwater, legacy lands, wildlife, and urban parks and green space. And this year, our coalition refreshed our policy priorities. And in the process of finding out what the new priorities are, we heard loud and clear that the threats from extractive industry corporations are legion. They are acting like our America the Beautiful is for sale for the benefit of a few corporate executives. These threats are happening in different places and in different ways, but there are major connecting threads that we need to get clear about. Irresponsible mining overreach is a public lands fight, an ocean fight, a freshwater fight, a wildlife fight, a tribal treaty rights fight, a sovereignty fight, a public health fight. And if your organization works on water, land, wildlife, tribal sovereignty, environmental justice, or public health, mining is already touching your mission, whether you've named it or not. This webinar is a chance to see how the fight in your backyard connects to fights happening all across the country and join a coordinated response that's bigger than any one organization can build alone. I'd like to turn now to coalition member Earthworks, which has deep experience in this fight and can speak more to what we are seeing in this moment and why we need more solidarity than ever. Erin Mintzes is the Deputy Policy Director and Senior Policy Counsel at Earthworks. Earthworks stands with communities on the front lines of mining and oil and gas extraction, and they work to implement long-term transformational alternatives to our energy and materials needs. Earthworks seeks mandatory requirements to secure and ensure communities' rights to approve or deny projects, to limit the harmful impacts of extractive industries, and to foster sustainable energy and materials systems. Erin, thanks so much for being with us today. Can you tell us more about why at this moment we need to unite the fights?
Thank you, Shantha. Thank you so much for allowing me to join this conversation. My name again is Erin Mintzes. I'm Deputy Policy Director at Earthworks, and we've been working on mining since 1988. But we're seeing something different now. I want to just quickly outlay what I think is always been there, what's always been there, and that is a minerals rush. In the 18th century, we were minerals rushing for precious metals. And in the 19th century, we were minerals rushing for uranium. And now in the 20th and 21st century, or I guess 19th, 20th, 21st now, it's pick your choice of the demand drivers, if it's renewable energy, or if it's the military, or if it's artificial intelligence and data centers and such. While the demand drivers have changed, what's the same is that every one of the lands and waters that we all care about are now under threat from mining, or have been under threat from mining. And we're seeing, especially to actually indigenous peoples in particular, as we're going to hear from a little bit later today, but this is happening all over, no matter what the monument or no matter what the place is. That's really where the real threat is. Now, I'll note with that in mind, what's new is that's always been around, but what's new is now the U.S. government's interest here. The government is now taking equity stakes and buying shares of stock in private mining corporations, or dishing out Defense Production Act loans or equity stakes, or other loan guarantees. And that's happening here in the United States, in the water, and on land, and in foreign countries as well. We're also seeing like the upset of the basic international order, whether or not we have a treaty like the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea for deep sea mining, or if it's a tribal treaty here in the United States. We're seeing like just sort of running roughshod over the basic international order. Also, domestically, as we're about to hear, we're just reinterpreting the way, certain statutes work, like the Congressional Review Act, in ways that we would really never have anticipated before this year. And so, what I want us to sort of figure out is we used to be having some of these conversations in silos. There's no shortage of solutions to all of these issues we face, whether it's on public lands or on public waters. But we need to make sure that we're all making sure we're working together and building a more cohesive narrative on what it is that we're all facing. And so that's part of what, Shanta, I'm hoping we're going to be able to be talking about today. So as we move forward today about the individual stories, we're learning more about then what are the actual solutions that we can push forward soon to help educate folks on what we're facing now and what we can do to make things better in the future about how we responsibly source our materials.
Thank you so much, Erin, and looking forward to continuing the conversation with you and the other panelists after we hear some stories from different places. So at this point, I want to invite our panelists on screen, and I'll just share a brief introduction to each of you and then invite you each to have your presentations flow one after the other. So first we will hear from Ingrid Lyons, who starting at just 4 years old, made annual trips with her family from New York City to northern Minnesota, where she fell in love with nature. And since joining the Boundary Waters, Save the Boundary Waters in 2015, Ingrid has worn many hats, and she's been the executive director since 2022. Next, we'll hear from Angelo Villagomez, who is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, where he focuses on Indigenous-led conservation. Angelo is also the co-chair of our ocean work group of the America the Beautiful for All Coalition, and through our coalition and a diverse constellation of allied partners, he has been putting up a strong fight against deep sea mining. Angelo was born in a village on an island in the Western Pacific Ocean next to Mariana Trench, and he is trained in Western scientific methods. And Angelo is a conservation advocate who uses Indigenous knowledge and values and the scientific method to address modern threats, including habitat loss, fishing, climate colonialism, including deep sea mining. Then we'll hear from Jasmine Vent. Jasmine was raised in Huslia, Alaska, and her mother's family is from Ambler. She was raised in a subsistence lifestyle, and she advocates for Alaska Native subsistence rights and works on environmental justice issues, including mining development, salmon conservation, and resource management decisions that impact rural Alaska Native communities. So I'm looking forward to hearing from each of you today, and let's turn it over now to Ingrid. Thank you.
Hello, really happy to be here today. As Shanta said, my name is Ingrid Lyons. I use she, her pronouns. I work for an organization called Save the Boundary Waters, which is actually run by a small nonprofit that was formed in the 90s called Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness. Save the Boundary Waters itself is a coalition of over 400 outdoor businesses, conservation groups, access groups, Native groups, veterans groups, etc. So really at our core, it's about understanding that there's a really, really broad tent of folks who care deeply about this place and want to see it protected from, in our case, sulfide or copper mining. So just a little bit of a background in case anybody is unaware of the Boundary Waters. The Boundary Waters is over 1.1 million acres of interconnected freshwater and boreal forest ecosystem. It is an increasingly rare type of landscape on our planet. The water is so clean that you could paddle to the middle of any of the lakes that you see on my screen, on your screen, dip your cup in and drink straight from it. So it's a really precious resource. Water is an extremely precious resource. But when you combine actually the surrounding landscapes around the Boundary Waters, you're talking about a much bigger landscape-wide threat posed by copper mining. So when you combine the Superior National Forest, which is the forest in which the Boundary Water sits and holds 20% of all of our nation's freshwater in the National Forest system, You combine it with Quetico Provincial Park on the Canadian side because we are up here in the north, and Voyageurs National Park to the north and west. You get that 4.3 million acres. Um, this is also the native homeland of the Anishinaabe people, and there are three bands, Boys Fort, Fond du Lac, and Grand Portage, who actually retain treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather in the entire Arrowhead region of Minnesota. And so this is also, as always, and of course, an issue of tribal sovereignty and justice. So we were founded and created to fight this very particular mining claim. So everyone who's kind of used to the West or from the West, public lands is a really kind of well understood, as far as I can tell, sort of topic or area. But here in the Midwest, we really don't have a ton of public lands, especially not federal public lands. We have really just what's up here in the Rainy River watershed. And so our organization started just over a decade ago when six folks from the small wilderness edge community of Ely, Minnesota, realized that the federal government had leasing rights in the watershed, and even more troublingly, immediately upstream of the wilderness. And even more troublingly, a company actually had held those mineral leases, a company called Twin Metals Minnesota, which is owned by a Chilean mining conglomerate called Antofagasta. And so this is actually the mine site as it exists right now at this very moment. And where my circle just dropped is where they would like to develop first. This waterway is called the South Kawishwe River, and it comes into Birch Lake, and both of these waterways flow into the boundary waters directly. This waterway has the horizon is the boundary waters. And these waterways have many, many homes, businesses, programs like Voyager Outward Bound School, which takes veterans and at-risk youth into the wilderness, along with really ancient burial sites in this immediate area and resorts and all sorts of things. So it's really, I think, when people think about developing mining, sometimes it can be really powerful to articulate to people or show them what we're really talking about in terms of the resource that's at risk, because this is what it looks like today. And I'm really specifically here to sort of tell the story of the use of the Congressional Review Act in this moment, and these different ways in which this administration in particular, like Aaron said, is leaning into some really unprecedented tools and methodologies in the interest of bulk extraction for any kind of reason they can articulate. And I'll get into that as well. But when we started and learned kind of, how do we deal with public lands? Who do we talk to in Washington? We made this little handy timeline for ourselves. We knew that first we needed to have the federal mineral leases canceled. There had never been production on these leases that had existed since 1966. So we wanted to cancel those federal mineral leases and then pursue a 20-year mining ban under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. So have the Secretary of Interior sign a public land order that would ban copper mining on all 225,504 acres in the headwaters of the boundary waters that are jointly managed by the federal government. And then finally, that would ideally give us a lovely cushion in which to pursue permanent protection. So kind of going from 0 to 100, and what we actually we're hoping it would be about 2 to 4 years, which jokes on us. We're, I think, coming on year 12 here. But what just happened through the use of the Congressional Review Act was that this 20-year mining ban, which we were able to secure in January of 2023, was overturned. We're big map people. I'm sure all of you are map people from a place-based perspective. So all this sort of ochre, yellow, mustard color is the 20-year mining ban. And you'll notice that it's actually south of the wilderness, but in this area, the water flows north. So this kind of funky little line here is a continental divide you've never heard of because it's probably about 3 feet tall, called the Laurentian Divide. And everywhere north of that, the water flows north and west. So any pollution from a Twin Metals mine would flow directly into the wilderness in violation of the Wilderness Act and the Clean Water Act into Quetico Provincial Park, which would violate a 1909 treaty. They would harm monomen or wild rice, which is a sacred crop for the Anishinaabe people, and a cornerstone for many species, migratory species, and others in the ecosystem, thus making the treaty rights null. How good are treaty rights if you can't actually eat the things you hunt, fish, and gather? And then also pollute Voyageurs National Park. And so, our whole thing has been not this mine, not this place. That's really how our 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 position. We're a very specific place-based campaign fighting sulfide or copper mining development in the headwaters. And we've had a lot of back and forths over the past decade. And when this administration came in, we knew that we needed to keep our eyes and ears open. The only mention of the state of Minnesota in Project 2025, that fun document, was overturning these watershed protections. Despite everything else that's happened to Minnesota in the course of several months here, it was the mineral withdrawal that was targeted by this administration. And so we've been fending off legislative attempts to overturn the withdrawal and reinstate twin metals leases, which were found to have been issued illegally. Um, and these have all happened through must pass avenues like budget reconciliation, National Defense Authorization Act, Interior Appropriations. And in some of these instances, there were lease terms that were as generous as perpetual lease terms. They went from 70 years to perpetual lease terms, which, we weren't formally part of the public land sell off, but this is a public land sellout. What is perpetual leasing but a sellout of public lands? So we were able to beat back all these legislative efforts, but we really saw something pretty wild happen in January that really took up sort of the first third of our year. It was the Congressional Review Act. So the Congressional Review Act is now being used in new and unprecedented ways that have really broad implications for public lands. So I'll talk a little bit more about this, but the primary question. So the Congressional Review Act, in the event that folks don't know what that is, the Congressional Review Act was passed in 1996, and essentially it's meant to give Congress oversight into agency rulemaking. When a federal agency goes through a rulemaking process and submits a rule to Congress that they've landed on, um, the Congressional Review Act allows a member of Congress to introduce a resolution of disapproval, basically saying this rule shouldn't exist. I oppose this rule. They're then given 60 days, 60 working days, um, and in that 60-day window, the filibuster doesn't apply. They only need simple majorities in either chamber to pass this resolution. Um, if the resolution passes and the rule is overturned, no substantially similar rule can be implemented in the future by a future administration. So it's a dangerous tool. I mean, it prevents things from happening ever again as any substantially similar rules. But very specifically, the definition of a rule is important here. In order for something to be scrutinized by the Congressional Review Act, it has to be considered a rule. And federal mineral withdrawals, like in the case of the Boundary Waters watershed, public land orders, have never, ever been considered or deemed to be rules subject to the scrutiny of the CRA. They live within their own world, the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, which outlines the exact process through which a federal mineral withdrawal or public land order has to go through. And importantly, too, CRA actions are not subject to judicial review. And so it's a dangerous tool, and it was inappropriately applied to mineral withdrawals. So typically, if a lawmaker wants to submit or wants to challenge something under the Congressional Review Act, they do have to take to the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, which tends to make a ruling that historically has been a respected ruling that folks follow as guidance. In this instance, GAO was skipped completely. There's never been a resolution as to the question, is a public land order a rule? And so it happened pretty quickly for us, and pretty strangely. And I get into these types of details because, again, for sort of lumping or seeing patterns across issues, like mining issues across the country, it's interesting to see these different tools and tactics kind of in actual play. So on January 6th, we saw the Deputy Interior Secretary, so not the secretary, not the solicitor, send our public land order, the mineral withdrawal, to Congress pursuant to the CRA as if it had just happened. Remember, this happened in January of 2023, so it was submitted as if it was a new rule. And a few days later, Representative Pete Stauber, who represents the 8th Congressional District here in Minnesota, introduced House Joint Resolution 140, and it passed out of the House on January 21st. So within 2 weeks, moved extremely quickly and passed the House. It was not a tight vote. We thought that we had a lot more Republicans, but the one Republican we did secure, Republican Don Bacon, said he had never been lobbied on anything harder in his life. Then had a long pause, moved to the Senate, passed the Senate 4950, and was signed into law on the 27th of April. And now we're seeing attempts to push forward the actual permits, or not the permits, I'm sorry, the mineral leases, because this CRA push did not include issuance of mineral leases, just revocation of those 20-year protections. And so we're right now battling some House Interior Appropriations language and looking at Budget Reconciliation 3.0. Accountability and impact quickly, because I know I'm taking a bit of time here. Accountability has been interesting because it kind of felt like we were the spearhead for using this particular procedure, and it was a difficult vote for a lot of folks. The White House got involved in the last week, and people really sort of buckled under that pressure. But we saw how powerful public lands were in 2025 when Senator Lee attempted to sell off. The response was absolutely enormous. And so I think that this, even though it's unfortunate for the Boundary Waters, and we're going to keep fighting for the Boundary Waters, we should use this and elevate this and not let people forget the vote that they took. A great example is Representative Stauber. He is somewhat in line to be the next House Natural Resources Committee chair, and we want to make folks like him and Senator Sheehy and others. We don't want them to forget that they, betrayed public lands, they betrayed Native communities, wilderness edge communities in creating this really dangerous precedent for public lands. Because the impact, it basically opens a question, could any past agency action be deemed a rule without any formal process? It's being used on resource management plans, of course, but there are other withdrawals that this, opens up this possibility to across, political parties and administrations. If withdrawals are on the table, there are military withdrawals. There are things about nuclear energy, and there are mineral withdrawals, PLOs for a whole host of things. Here are just a few that came up when we did some research during the CRA: Thompson Divide, Immigrant Crevice, protection of solar energy zones in many, many states. So it creates a dangerous precedent for all of us. And what's next on the Boundary Waters? The state plays a really critical role here. We have some powerful backup options, but I think importantly, what's next is this moment of figuring out how we unite across issues, because we are seeing, the same sort of attempt on many other, or the same approach with many other issue areas, this sort of overwhelm, this mass overwhelm, um, really taking a toll on advocacy communities and folks who've been engaged in this. And so don't lose the hope, but I'm really excited to be part of this conversation to talk about how we draw some of those parallels and how we build off of one another's work, for the benefit of us all, because we're really all kind of under the same attack at the end of the day. And so I appreciate the time, and we'll hear from others next.
Thank you, Ingrid. Over to you, Angelo.
Hey, Olivia. pull up the slides in a minute or two. You don't need it right away, but as you figure it out. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with all of you today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Angelo Villagomez. I work for an organization in Washington, D.C. called the Center for American Progress. And I am Chamorro, born in the Mariana Islands, where my father and all of his ancestors are buried, going back thousands of years. I've been asked to speak today about deep sea mining in the U.S. territories, but I'm going to borrow a technique from President Trump, and I'm going to weave a few topics together because these issues are inextricably linked. So let's start with 30 by 30. 30 by 30, protecting 30% of lands and waters by 2030, was intended to protect our shared natural heritage for future generation. It's the reason this coalition came together. But under the current administration, rather than working to protect this country that we share, it seems like nothing can stop them from selling out our shared lands and waters to industry. Today, we are seeing an aggressive push to lease our public waters to the highest bidder, opening vast areas to oil and gas drilling off Florida, California, and Alaska. Today, we are seeing industrial fishing fleets allowed in our most sensitive marine sanctuaries. And today, mining companies have set their sights on the riches of the deep sea. On April 24th, 2025, Donald Trump signed an executive order unleashing America's offshore critical minerals and resources. In the months since, his administration has advanced 3 separate processes to allow mining in the Pacific, with a 4th starting tomorrow in the Atlantic. So when we talk about deep sea mining in the United States, we need to be clear about one fundamental question. Who is being asked to take the risk? Because the answer is not all of us. The answer, overwhelmingly, is the indigenous Americans living in Alaska and the U.S. Pacific territories. Proposed mining activities are being concentrated in our communities. Environmental risks will be felt first and most intensely in our communities. And the places that often have the least say in federal decision-making are also our communities too. That imbalance is not accidental, and sadly, it's not new. And it's inherently unjust. For Native Chamorros, Rafalawash, Samoans, and other Micronesian and Pacific peoples, the ocean is not a frontier for exploitation or a line item on a balance sheet. It is a living relative. It is a sacred space and the very foundation of our cultural identity. It is our worldview. We do not own the ocean. We have an ancestral responsibility to protect it. What we are witnessing has a name: resource colonialism. The Trump administration is prioritizing short-term corporate gain over the free, prior, and informed consent of our communities. These policies are being imposed on us without real consultation, forcing us to observe permanent environmental costs while receiving none of the economic benefits. Thankfully, some people are paying attention. In Congress, there is growing bipartisan concern about deep-sea mining. In recent oversight hearings, lawmakers from both parties are asking hard questions about the environmental risks, the regulatory framework, and the implications for our communities. The public is speaking up too. Earlier this year, more than 200,000 petitions, letters, and public comments were submitted opposing deep-sea mining in Alaska and the territories. These efforts are being led by organizations in the territories, like Friends of the Mariana Trench and the Micronesia Climate Change Alliance, with support from partners across the continental United States, like the America the Beautiful for All Coalition and the National Ocean Protection Coalition. Olivia, can you go to the next slide? So let me just run through the numbers with you so that you understand the scale of the proposed reaping. Click. I'm only going to show you the numbers for the exclusive economic zone, but keep in mind that the Trump administration is also making moves to lease out the seabed in the high seas, which goes against international convention. It's already been mentioned today, and is trying to help U.S. companies gain access to the waters of other countries. But these are the numbers for U.S. waters. Can you make the next? Can you click? See what happens? Maybe something. There we go. Thank you. In American Samoa, the proposed mining area covers about 33 million acres, roughly the size of Florida. In the Northern Mariana Islands, it's about 69 million acres, comparable to the size of Nevada. And in Alaska, the area reaches 113 million acres, larger than the entire state of California. Combined, that's over 215 million acres of seafloor. To put it another way, we are talking about an area roughly equivalent to 2 Californias being open to potential mining. That's over 218 Rhode Islands. Don't ever want to leave Rhode Island out. Um, can you click on the slide? I also want to touch on the recent marine monument rollbacks and fishing because they also greatly affect the U.S. Pacific territories. They also provide context of the scale of today's assault on ocean health. The United States has 5 marine national monuments, all designated or expanded or rolled back or reinstated between 2006 and today. When the Biden administration announced that the United States had protected 1/3 of U.S. oceans, these 5 monuments were doing about 99% of that work. But since taking office for a second time, the Trump administration has taken action to roll back portions of all 5 monuments, and they are each in various stages of regulation rollback or lawsuits pushing back. I'm not going to get into those details in this talk, but I will share the numbers if these lawsuits fail and the administration gets its way. The Trump administration is attempting to open the entirety of the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts and the Rose Atoll monuments and vast portions of Mariana Trench, Pacific Remote Islands, and Papahanaumokuakea monuments to industrial fishing. This is a combined area of 2.3 million square kilometers, twice the size of Greenland, being stripped of its protections. Click twice. Oh, there, you're already doing it. When you add the mining leases to the fishing rollbacks, you get 3.2 million square kilometers, nearly 28% of the U.S. exclusive economic zone. If the administration had to set a goal to sell 30% of our ocean to private industry by 2030, they might be on the verge of doing just that. This is an inversion of our values. This is an inversion of our history. It represents a reversal of decades of effort, decades of science, decades of policy, decades of advocacy, and decades of community leadership aimed at protecting ocean ecosystems. So where do we go from here? John Oliver says that at the end of all of his shows. The administration is engaged in a systemic dismantling of our protected heritage. These policies are not merely unjust, they are a direct violation of our fundamental rights. But they have underestimated us. The America the Beautiful for All Coalition is a unified cross-territorial force of indigenous leaders, scientists, and citizens. We are not asking for a seat at the table. We are demanding that the table be redesigned to respect our knowledge and our sovereignty. So if you believe that stewardship outweighs extraction, I invite you to join us. Please sign our petition to oppose deep sea mining. Help us stop this agenda in its tracks. These Trump policies are unjust and unpopular, but with your help, we can make them unlikely to move forward. Thank you very much.
Ooh, thank you, Angelo. And over to you, Jasmine.
Hey, everybody. So I'll just quickly introduce myself again. Uvanga atiga Sikanik, Levisa Pamingoranga. My Inupiaq name is Sikanik. It means the sun. My English name is Jasmine Vent, and I'm Khoikhon and Inupiaq from the village of Huslia. My mom's family comes from Ambler, and I was raised in the village of Huslia. And I'm joining today to talk about the Ambler Road, which is a proposed 211-mile industrial access road in Northwest Alaska. So it would connect the Dalton Highway to the Ambler Mining District. And the area is speculated to have unknown amounts of deposits of copper, cobalt, zinc, and other minerals. And kind of on a certain perspective, the road is intended to provide access for mining development and also the transportation of equipment, supplies, other materials. And supporters of the project kind of argue that it could strengthen domestic mineral production and create a lot of jobs contributing to economic growth. However, the project has significant debate, and there's this very wide unified opposition because of its impacts on environmental, cultural, and social impacts, as well as just the project being a boondoggle and it's not economically feasible. So I tend to speak about the project from a tribal perspective because for Alaska Native tribes and communities in the region, the road would cross lands and waters that support our subsistence hunting, our fishing, our trapping, our gathering activities. I mean, we've lived in this area for 10 to 15,000 years, and we don't want to see destruction in the area. The development would cross 11 major rivers and over 3,000 streams. So, as communities with very deep connections to these lands, our tribes have been very loud and vocal regarding the importance of meaningful consultation about the project and also just a very careful consideration on how the project could affect both present and future generations. And on that note, there are currently 88 tribal resolutions against the development. So that makes up about 15% of the tribes in all of the United States that do not want this road and have made it very clear within their tribal governments. And I come from two of those 88 tribes. Um, so I kind of want to speak about how I got involved in this advocacy. I was 11 or 12 when I first attended an Ambler Road meeting. I'm now 25, so I've spent about half my life very engaged in this advocacy. And it was a meeting that took place in my hometown of Huslia, and I just very clearly remember there being no support for the development. And, fast forward to now, there's still no support for it now. But what stuck with me from that meeting when I was younger is a lot of our elders were still alive at the time. And I remember our elders joining that meeting and making it very clear this is not something we want or need. So that really stuck with me. So it's been very important for me to continue that perspective and respect my elders' wishes and make sure that those voices aren't being silenced. And I also wanted to mention right now in our area, we're already experiencing a salmon collapse. We haven't been able to legally fish for salmon for about 7 years now. So we're experiencing a historic salmon collapse. We have huge concerns for our caribou populations that are already continuing to decrease. So with that, it doesn't make sense to us to push development through when we know the impacts are going to be drastic, especially for communities that are already facing different tragedies. We are grieving for our salmon right now, and our people are already hungry. So why push something through that's only going to continue to decimate those populations? Regarding advocacy, we've done multiple trips to DC to advocate against the development, but I kind of wanted to talk about a recent trip that we took to DC. And this was last month. We went there to speak about the unified opposition against the development. And over the course of our visit, I attended 18 meetings. And I think what I really took away from that trip was one of the most meaningful parts of the experience was showing up to these meetings alongside people from different states who shared examples from their own communities about why this kind of development is harmful. So it really meant a lot to me to see others stand with us in Alaska and support our position. A lot of the discussion actually ended up talking about the boundary waters issues. And I just think that on that note, I believe that as more of our states come together on issues like this as like a joint force, providing all of these examples from things that we're all seeing in our different areas. I think that's a really good thing, and we'll start to see great impacts from that. So I left DC that time feeling really hopeful and trying to think more about how we can collaborate with other states on different issues that people are experiencing. Um, Also from that trip, I felt like a renewed hope again, just because, we've had a lot of issues with this administration, but leaving that trip this time last month, it was very clear that the opposition to this project is not going away, and we're not going to back down. Many of the offices we met with were already aware of the issue and supportive of the opposition. Um, and I think that a consistent message we heard was that the project is a boondoggle, and just at the end of the day, even if the tribal perspectives weren't engaged, it's the project lacks responsible development practices and is just straight up not economically feasible. So I kind of wanted to just provide a brief update on what's going on right now too. So with this administration, Trump had reversed the previous administration's rejection of the road and reinstated earlier approvals. So in October of last year, he approved moving the project forward and linked it to national security and critical minerals objectives, which we worked really hard in previous years to make sure that it was known it's not an issue of national security. The administration had also announced plans for the US government to purchase roughly 10% stake in Trilogy Metals. And within that, the stated goal was that it was going to support domestic supplies of critical minerals such as copper, cobalt, zinc, and just other metals that are speculated to be found in the Ambler mining district. So there are different administration officials, including Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, said that the federal government was considering becoming a financing partner or even an equity partner. So you know, it's not just the mining company too. So we're hoping that doesn't happen. And before that trip to DC last month, the day before we left, we also traveled to Coldfoot, Alaska, because Secretary Doug Burgum, Governor Mike Dunleavy, and Congressman Nick Begich flew there to celebrate permits issued by the Trump administration to construct the road. So the proposed route would begin near Coldfoot, and it was just a really um, it was kind of just a weird photo op for them, just to summarize it in that way. They didn't think anybody would be there, but we had gotten notice the day before, and we were there to meet them on the runway as they got off the plane. So we tried to have productive conversations with them. And when I brought up the fact about 88 tribes having resolutions against the development, an official that was associated with Trilogy Metals had responded back with, well, there are 6 tribes that support the road. Are you saying that those tribes don't matter? So, thinking from that perspective, 88 tribes opposing the development versus 6 tribes supporting the development, they made it really clear that they aren't really thinking about the opposition. Will try to do what they can to benefit the mining, regardless of the impacts. So that was kind of just a brief update. I hope that was enough information, but I guess I just want to make it clear that we are not going to be backing down, and we really appreciate any type of support that we can get regarding the fight. Um, I've been involved with it for a long time, but I really it's very important for me to speak from my tribe's perspectives and push those voices out. Because at the end of the day, we're some of the smallest tribes in the world, and we're facing off some of the biggest industries in the world. So I think that our voice being heard and that opposition continuing to grow just really shows how important it is to not push this development through. And I think that, in the years to come and the different developments that take place, that opposition is only going to continue to grow and get larger. So I really appreciate you all taking the time to hear me out today and giving me this opportunity to speak from my perspective. I wanted to thank the ACMA Network, the Alaska Mining Impacts Network. I feel like they do a really good job at creating space for conservation, tribal, and community leaders to kind of like create and share resources and foster collaboration between us. They've been a really great resource for me as I navigate these different mining issues. So I just wanted to share that and wanted to just let you all know I'm really thankful to have this opportunity to speak on this issue. If anybody ever has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Um, if there's any way I can get you my contact information, whatever works. But thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. We can definitely circulate that in the post-event materials. I now want to turn to our storytellers to ask a few questions. And the first one that I have for all of you is, what dots do Americans need to connect between all of these different mining stories?